coming up.
So I was always a little worried, like, oh, it might take a little longer, a few months, but I'm sure it'll be fine. And when we were about 9 months into trying, because they say it typically takes 6 to 9 months to conceive, and I hit that 9-month mark and I was like, okay, I'm starting to get worried.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, mamas.
Welcome back to Raising Mama.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Chelsea.
I'm a divorced mama of 2 toddlers sharing custody while running my own business.
And I'm a full-time nurse, pregnant with my second baby, and married to a stay-at-home dad.
Join us while we talk about the most pressing issues related to postpartum and new parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by Raising Mama, a bamboo baby brand dedicated to empowering moms during postpartum and raising awareness about maternal mental health. Raising Mama's buttery soft bamboo pajamas aren't just designed to help babies sleep better, they're made to support mothers too. And for every pair sold, a portion of the proceeds is donated to Postpartum Support International. As a thank you for listening, enjoy 20% off your next order with code RaisingMamaVillage at checkout, because we're all in this together.
Today, we're talking about infertility, intrauterine insemination, and IVF, and we're bringing on Julie Ouye, a 4th grade teacher who is going to share her journey about IVF during COVID. All right, so Megan, how's your journey with infertility and pregnancy? What are your thoughts? Because that's what we're getting into today.
Yeah, let's talk about infertility a bit together. So I know that neither of us have really any experience with this. So, which is probably why we haven't talked about it yet. But I think it's such a huge issue and concern for so many mamas out there. And both of us have people very close to us that have had infertility issues, sometimes at the end successfully having a baby and being able to have a baby, and sometimes not. So I think for me, the biggest reason why I want to talk about it is because we're so big on mental health. And I think that this issue can be so isolating because I think, historically there can be, and not always, but there can be, feelings of shame about this, feelings of embarrassment about this. And not only that, because it doesn't happen to everybody, right? Not everybody needs to have IVF. Not everybody has miscarriages, although I feel like most people have at least one. But I just feel like it breaks my heart because I know that the women that experience this have such a hard time with it. And it's also difficult sometimes to know what to say. So my hope is that through talking with Julie on this podcast, who Julie actually went to high school with us, and just a little background, I want to let you talk too, but just a little background. So she was sharing her infertility journey on Instagram, and I was following her like we do follow people from high school. And I followed it. I followed along for a couple years. And then, when she finally had her baby, I connected with her during postpartum, and we sort of became internet friends from there. So, but I've always wanted to talk to her more in depth about it. And I'm so excited that we get to, because I kind of lack a perspective just personally. So what about you?
Well, what I think is so interesting about infertility and maybe this modern age, or at least in my circle, is we live in California. I live in the Bay Area. Megan lives in Oxnard. And certainly out of my friend group, it's so normal for most women I know to have their first child at 30 or above. And I'm pretty sure historically it was at least, 26 or 27, even a generation or two ago. And I feel like something that was definitely pounded into my head was do not get pregnant young, go on birth control as soon as possible. Having a pregnancy was combined with this idea of your whole life is going to end. And I think it's really interesting because I certainly made a lot of choices in my super young ages with regarding my reproductive system. And it was all about like, don't get pregnant. And I never thought about maybe like long-term repercussions or the idea that one day I might want to get pregnant or, so I just think it's really interesting that, yes, I think we're living in a time where people can share their stories more freely than they used to. So it's just more of a common thing to know about people having these struggles than they did in the past. But I also think that we're living in this time where it's like people do have kids a little bit older and people don't know a lot. For a long time, they might even have this issue because it's not like they were trying at the age of, whatever it was, 26 or 27. And a lot of my friends are in the healthcare community. And it was always this idea of like, you go through school, you go through your residency, like you finish all that first. And so the first time they might, try to get pregnant is at like 34. And that just becomes this like really scary age to learn, not scary, but it can just be alarming. Like, oh, I thought I was going to get, just like everything else, like check down the mark, like by 35, I'll be pregnant. And then I do this and then I do that. Yeah. And I don't know. I wonder if something we'll learn in like, especially speaking today, we'll learn to like tell our daughters maybe a slightly different narrative or, our sons as well of just, yes, you want to definitely not have a kid when you don't want a kid, but you also want to know about how to have a kid when you do want a kid. And if there's anything like you could know about your body beforehand, because I think there's tons of testing out there that you can do early on about like egg counts or any, all those things that if you know a little bit beforehand, maybe could be helpful. Those are the thoughts I have in my head about today. And I'm curious if any of my inklings are true or, if I'm just totally wrong. Because that's just what I wonder about infertility. Is it like way more common now? Because it seems like it's way more common now. Or is it just more talked about now? I don't know.
My first true, when you're younger and like in high school and, you know that this is a thing that exists, but I think it's so far removed from like where you're at in life.
Totally.
But I think my first real realization of like, holy shit, that must be so hard is when I was actually trying. And, it took a few months or something, totally normal. But I remember, at the time I was dead set because my husband and I had decided that we wanted to have kids and we were like, okay, we need to start trying. It didn't happen accidentally. It was very intentional. So I remember, having sex and then, learning about the 2-week wait and like what that even is. Cause when you're first trying to get pregnant, you don't know what the 2-week wait is. Like it's this whole other world. Like there's even an acronym for it, TWW and like how many like DPO, like days past ovulation, you start learning about this whole world of trying to get pregnant. And I remember that 2-week wait being excruciating, which is like, it's so like compared to people that actually have infertility issues, like it's embarrassing to even say that. But then, if you don't get pregnant and then you have to wait again. And it's like, wow, you really only have one shot a month, which duh, like, okay, I know that. But when you're experiencing it, you're like, wow, I can't even fathom.
That's what I'm saying. Like when the narrative pushed in my head was like, you will get pregnant like that, like be so careful with like birth control and everything, because the second you're not looking, you're going to be pregnant. So it really doesn't prepare you for it to be different than that. And it is, of course, yes, you can get pregnant like that. But for the most part, there's at least, a few months. And then for many people, it's years. And it's psychologically, it's such a huge transformation of thought that it's like, I feel like it's very easy to think like, what's wrong with me? This was supposed to happen in an instant. Like this is what I was supposed to be hardcore avoiding for so long. And then it's just that reality, I don't think I would be prepared for, or just even like you said, the waiting once per month was not even something to be prepared for is, it's odd. It's odd that it's such a shocking thing when it's obviously so normal.
Yeah. Well, I think, the goal is to, at least of this episode, is to bring some awareness about it, talk about someone's journey. We hope that, some of the things she talks about resonates with you, validates your emotions about your own journey if you've had a journey with infertility. And I'm excited to get into it.
Totally. Yeah. There isn't, I would say 1 out of every 2 friends I have or major person I know has been going through this. So I'm so happy that she decided to come on, because it's a super brave thing to talk about, because it's not the easiest thing. So it's I know that her story is going to touch a lot of people, because even though it's more common to talk about it more than ever, there's still a lot of people that it's happening, but they don't say it. So I think that I feel so blessed that we have someone willing to share the experience and teach us and teach everyone else.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's bring her on.
Let's do it.
Before we dive in, hit the subscribe button for more expert insights and honest conversations on Raising Mama podcast. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Julie Ouye, a 4th grade teacher of 12 years and proud mother to a beautiful 1-year-old son. And Julie's here to bravely share her journey through infertility, including her experiences with IUI and IVF treatments, the financial burden, and the emotional toll that comes with navigating the fertility process. Julie has openly shared her story on social media to ensure no one feels alone in their struggle. Her honesty, strength, and determination are a source of inspiration for so many, and we're grateful to have her with us to share what she's learned. From advocating for herself in the healthcare system to balancing motherhood with teaching, Julie's story offers hope and valuable insights for anyone facing infertility. So thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because, like I was explaining before, we both went to high school with you. You and I have always had mutual friends. I think, we've actually established we've known each other even longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was following you on Instagram and followed along, with your story. And I thought it was so cool. I thought it was so dope that you were open about it and sharing about it. And I think that that's so brave and honorable. And now, I get to see our cute little pajamas on your baby. And it's just the best story in so many ways. So
thank you.
I say we get right into it, because I know we have a lot of good questions. My big question was, Julie, looking back on your journey, can you tell us about the moment you realized you might be facing infertility, and what was the initial testing process like for you?
Sure. So my husband and I got married in 2019, and we decided to wait a year before we tried to conceive. And then COVID hit. And, we thought this was going to last 2 weeks, 2 months. We'll just wait a little longer. COVID lasted a lot longer than we thought. So we said, let's just go for it. Let's try and see what happens. Mm. And I always had an irregular period since I got my period at 13 years old. Mm. And so I was always a little worried, it might take a little longer, a few months, but I'm sure it'll be fine. And when we were about 9 months into trying, because they say it typically takes 6 to 9 months to conceive. And I hit that 9-month mark, and I was like, okay, I'm starting to get worried. And I reached out to my doctor, and she said, well, they typically want you to wait a year before you can speak to a specialist. But I really had to advocate for myself. And I said, I know myself, my cycle is really irregular. It's really long. I've been tracking my ovulation, and it's really late. And so I had all this data. I'm a little type A, so I had all this data recorded, and I showed this to my doctor, and she was like, oh, okay, let me get you in sooner than the year mark. So I really had to push for that. And then they started tests. They did a semen analysis on my husband to rule out male infertility, and everything checked out. It looked great. And then I did a lot of blood tests, checking hormone levels and things like that. And then they also did an HSG test, which is basically using a contrast dye to check for blocked fallopian tubes. So they're trying to like rule out as much as they can. And we got the quote, good news that there was nothing wrong, which was kind of frustrating that moment. I almost wish they would tell me something was wrong so we could maybe fix it. But they didn't know the cause. And we had to start the process of fertility treatments from there.
So it sounds like you had kind of the gut intuition around 9 months. And then after all that testing, there still wasn't like a clear answer as to what maybe the underlying problem was. Did you ever find out what the underlying problem was?
They categorize it as unexplained infertility, which I think is about a third of cases where there's nothing really wrong. But I kind of just like diagnosed myself. Like I know that my ovulation was so late in my cycle that there's no way that egg wasn't over mature. So I feel like it wasn't getting fertilized because it was over mature. So I think that's what the problem was. And that's why I was so hopeful when we started. First, they started me on oral medication just to help me grow follicles. And we did time intercourse. Then that didn't work. So then they moved on to IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. And they basically take the sperm sample, clean it up, get the best of the best, and use a catheter to insert it directly into my uterus to give me the highest chance of conception. But you also have to, we did that oftentimes like double 2 days in a row. And there's also a trigger shot. So that triggers your ovulation. So I was thinking, this is the fix. Like I'm positive this is going to work. I know this is my issue. So if they make sure the eggs are the right size and we time the ovulation, it's going to work. And we did 6 of those. Typically, they recommend 3 before moving on to IVF. But I was just like so desperately holding on to this hope that that was going to work. And it was cheaper than IVF. So I was like, let's do it as much as we can. And unfortunately, that didn't work either. So we had to move on to IVF.
What was your headspace like during this whole early process in the beginning? Because I imagine there's some shock in the beginning, you know, and then I'm sure it evolved over time. So can you just like explain what was going through your head?
Definitely. Keep in mind, this was going on during COVID, and I was at the beginning of treatments was teaching remotely. And then during this journey, I transitioned back to in-person teaching when most people were still remote. COVID numbers were still very high. I was super anxious about getting COVID because if I did, my treatments could be canceled. And I stopped my anxiety medication because I just wanted to like clear out my system, give myself the best chance. So that added another layer to it of the anxiety being heightened. So,
because when your treatments are canceled, you don't get your money back, right?
You don't get the money back for medication. I believe you can get the money back if it was like an egg retrieval or transfer, but all the medication, which can be $5,000 for a month, you don't get that money back. And you also, it's all these injections and shots and hormones going crazy for nothing. So the stress was at an all-time high. Just honestly, the COVID aspect stressed me out almost more than the fertility treatments.
How did that affect your life and like your day-to-day?
I wasn't super open about it until we were pregnant. And then I was like, I'll just, blast it on my social media. I want people not to feel alone. But in that moment, I was going through such a hard time that I wasn't opening up to a lot of people. And I felt really isolated. I felt alone. I had one friend that had gone through IVF. So that was nice to have her, but also she had like a medical diagnosis. So she knew when she was going to have kids, she had to do IVF. She got to skip all, the IUI and all that. So I didn't know anyone who went through exactly what I went through. And later when like coworkers found out, they're just like, oh my gosh, I never would have known. Like you just had such a brave face. And it's like, I just, put up this wall and smiled through it. I have a job where I'm working with 10-year-olds. I can't show, these true emotions. So it was
and
really
you can't
hard.
get COVID.
And you can't get COVID with 30 germy kids.
Yeah.
So my mask was my best friend. But yeah, emotionally, I mean, it affected my marriage as well. Luckily, we have really good communication, and in ways it brought us stronger. But I mean, the romance factor is out the window when you've been trying for 2-3 years, and it's very scientific. And so it's hard because there's not a lot of support for males in that situation as well. I reached out like on social media. I started following a lot of infertility like meme accounts, and just found a way to like laugh through it and bond with these strangers who I've never met before, but I felt closer in that moment to them than some of my friends, because I just felt like, oh my gosh, they get me, they get what I'm going through. And we could just laugh about this terrible situation, because what else can you do sometimes?
Totally. For like people like me who don't know, like what's like the snapshot of like a month of the IUI, or like what's expected of you? Like, I mean, I know that like basically I'm learning, right? There's 3 major ways. One is like you want to get your egg triggered and prepped. One, you want the semen to go in on the exact day. And then, but I know there's more to it. Like what were the steps in the month that you'd have to take to like be ready for everything?
I actually looked for my like medication schedule and all the monthly schedule to show you, because it's so insane. Especially like leading up to the egg retrieval. So the IUI, there wasn't as much into it. It was basically oral medication and then the trigger shot for ovulation the night before you go in for the IUI. So that wasn't, it was more the day of was stressful, because we need to get up by 6 a.m. and my husband has the pressure to deliver the sample, and then we have to drive 30 minutes to deliver it, drive home for 2 hours, go back for the actual IUI, do that 2 days in a row, like take off work for it. So that day of was stressful. Leading up wasn't as bad. But IVF is a whole nother beast. Leading up to the egg retrieval, which it also was very drawn out for me because of COVID, Kaiser's schedule was way backed up. So I'm thinking I'm going to, it was July when I started birth control, which was the beginning of the process. And it wasn't until January that we did the transfer. So I'm thinking like this was going to be quicker, but I got on the schedule for egg retrieval in September. And leading up to that, it's basically blood work and ultrasounds every day, like every other day, blood work, ultrasound. To check.
You're supposed to be teaching. Like,
yeah. Oh, and the blood Kaiser didn't open till 8, and I had to be at school at 8:15. And so I was like pushing old people out of the way. Like, I need to get first. Oh my God. Yeah. So that was really stressful. And then the egg retrieval in September, after that, I was thinking, we'll do the transfer in maybe October, November at the latest. And then I call and they're backed up. So now they were thinking December. And then I call and they're saying, no, it looks more like January. So it's just like waiting and waiting and waiting. And in the interim, I'm finding out friends are pregnant. And I'm just like, it was such a long process to just even get to the first round of IVF.
And I guess like hearing all that, I don't know. I know through friends that I've had, like part of some of the challenge is just feeling like all of this is like you work, like you're taking the shots. You're the one who has to be there in the ultrasound. You're the one who's doing the blood work. You're the one like navigating work. Like, did you ever feel any kind of like animosity towards your partner, or how was it kind of taking on this project? And like, was there any way to kind of divvy up the tasks at all?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly felt no animosity because he did everything he could. Like he gave me every shot. I never had to give myself a shot. He was my nurse through the whole thing. I was too scared and he figured out his way to do it. And he's not an early riser. And the progesterone and oil shot had to be given at 7 a.m. And, he'd get up and he'd be half asleep and he's ready to go. And I have some funny pictures and videos from that time. But he was a really great support system in that. And, he'd go to every IUI with me, as many appointments as he could. Luckily, he has a flexible work schedule. He works from home. Mm-hmm. So he was really like in the process with me. So I didn't feel alone in that sense. But then there's also that other aspect of like, you're not experiencing the hormones I am. Like, I'm not overreacting this moment. I physically cannot help myself how I'm feeling. So that's where having the female friends that have been through it is really important.
Man.
So, like, infertility treatments like IUI and IVF, they come with a steep learning curve, I'm sure. I mean, it sounds really complicated. It is complicated. What was the biggest surprise or challenge for you when navigating that treatment process?
I would say the biggest surprise was that it's not guaranteed. I naively went in like, this is the answer. Like I said, with the IUI, I knew it was going to work, and then it didn't. And then with IVF, I was like, well, I'll probably get at least like 6 embryos. That's what my friend got. And then it might not work the first time, but we'll have several chances. And, just really naive in that sense. And then finding out I'm underproducing eggs, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And, my doctor said, it only takes 1. And I'm like, that's really not helpful right now. But because I'm just like mourning the fact that I have, single digit.
Doctors have a knack for that, don't they?
Like, yeah, thanks. So I ended up producing only 9 eggs, which originally I was told maybe around 11, which was already a pretty low number. And that created 3 mature eggs and only 1 viable embryo. So that was shocking to be like, we just went through all this, spent tens of thousands of dollars, and you're telling me I have 1 chance. And if it doesn't work, we're out all that money and I have to start over. Like, I couldn't even wrap my head around that. And I think that's why I kind of felt at peace going into the transfer, because I was just like, this has to work, because I don't think I could recover if it doesn't. And so I just told myself it's going to work, and then deal with it after if it doesn't. And so I just really had that like mindset of like, it's okay, it's going to work.
How long does it take before you know whether or not it worked?
9 days, they do a blood test. And then because the embryo's already matured for 5 days, and then, blood test at 9 days, and then you get a call from a nurse. So that also was another struggle and challenge of, having in your head how it's going to go when you announce your pregnancy. I was excited one day to surprise my friends and family and do a cute little reveal. And like, everyone now close to me knows I'm going through this. They're waiting for this. I find before my husband knows, I'm talking to a stranger nurse who's telling me, and I'm crying. And I don't have time to celebrate because she's telling me about the medication next schedule and next appointment. And it was such a struggle. And another big challenge was just like feeling like we had to be experts in healthcare. Like, my husband didn't know how to give a shot to someone. He's a graphic designer, like content marketing manager. They're not in the medical field. So like the night before the egg retrieval, even, he had to mix 2 medications. Like, it really felt like some Breaking Bad stuff. Like, there's the liquid and there's the solid, and it's chemistry. And we had to do it exactly 7:45 p.m. And we were running behind, and I'm kind of rushing him because I'm freaking out. And he ended up mixing the medication wrong. And he gave me 1/5 of the dose that I was supposed to receive. And we're freaking out. We're calling Kaiser Advice Line, and they're just like, I don't know what to tell you. Call your doctor in the morning. And the nurse calls me and was like, what did you do? And like made us feel terrible about it. I don't know. Can you just help me? And she's like, go to Kaiser right now. And get blood work. And I'm driving. And as I'm driving, she calls back. She's like, no, go back. Make your husband give you another shot. Then go to the blood work. And I'm just freaking out. And I call my doctor. And this is the doctor that told me it takes 1. Very like, his affect is very dry. And I called and I just said, like, what's going to happen? He said, well, there's no guarantee we'll have eggs tomorrow. And I said, so what happens to the $14,000 for the egg retrieval? Like, you're going to put me under and there might not be eggs? And he's like, yep, we'll just have to wait and see.
Whew.
And so my husband was like so depressed. He's like, I screwed this up. And I'm like, there's no way that this is your fault. And so the next day when we found out we at least got those 9 eggs, we were like on top of the world. He's like, I feel like I can see in color again. Like, he felt so relieved, but the stress leading up to that was just insane. Like, nothing I'd ever experienced before.
It's wild that they don't have folks who come to your house and perform the shots and do the things.
Yeah. Or at least train you, like nurses to train you or something.
Yeah, at least that.
Yeah.
Well, and I know a lot of our listeners wanted to answer this question, like, what is the actual cost breakdown for like the IUI and the IVF? Like, is it all out of pocket? Can it be covered? Like, I'm kind of curious on, it's crazy how much of a gamble it can be. And like, if you get COVID, poof, it's gone. If you get the wrong trigger shot done at home, poof, like it's a lot of money with a pretty big chance of even just before you get to the finish line, something messes up.
All right, we're going to pause the show for just a minute because I want to share something personal with you. After having my first baby, I felt completely unprepared for how challenging postpartum life would be. I quickly realized that society just doesn't give moms the support we deserve. That's why I created Raising Mama, to make those early days just a little bit easier. Raising Mama pajamas are made from the softest bamboo fabric, engineered with micro gaps to help babies sleep better and give mamas a much needed boost. The prints feature uplifting messages like, "Mama, I wished for you," and "It's okay to ask for help." Phrases that are meant to prevent those negative thought cycles that so many of us struggle with during postpartum. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want to give you a special 20% off with the code Raising Mama Village. Plus, every time you buy a pair, we donate $1 to Postpartum Support International to support maternal mental health. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now let's get back to the show.
Exactly. So it varies from person to person. Like I have a friend of a friend who wanted to see a fertility specialist and it was $800 just for the consult. So she's like, okay, I'm not going to go down that route. For me, I was lucky enough. I did have coverage for IUI. So it was a $50 copay, and then it was the cost of medication, which was like $80 each time we did it. So it was very affordable for me. But again, we had another friend who it was thousands of dollars for each IUI. So it varies person to person. And then IVF, for most individuals, it's completely out of pocket. Unless you work for a big tech company like Google, Workday, I believe they have IVF coverage. But this was, they break it down basically by egg retrieval, frozen embryo transfer, and medication costs. So for me, the egg retrieval was $14,000. The transfer was about $5,000. And each round of medication was about $5,000. For me, because I was underproducing, I had to get additional medication, so it added to the medication cost. So I would say anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000.
Wow. And like you said, it's not like a guaranteed, like, yeah, you got a really good chance of this working. It's more like a 50-50 shot, right?
They say with IVF, the percentages are usually around 55% of an embryo transfer being implanting and working. But for me, I say quality over quantity. We had a really good embryo. There's like different grades to it. Like AA is the best, and we were BA. So by the time we got to the transfer, the doctor said, you have about a 70% chance this will work. So I was like, I like those odds.
But then again, you didn't even know what the underlying issue was. So maybe it had nothing to do with having a great embryo and a great sperm. Maybe it was like something with your uterus. So it's still.
Yeah. And I found out I had a tilted uterus, which I didn't know until this process. I'm like, why is this not things we can learn about ourselves before you're having infertility issues? But that could have been one of the reasons, like the IUI wasn't working and conceiving naturally wasn't, because it's like going up a ramp. So it's a lot of like, it could have been, but just never had a definite answer. So that's kind of.
I always find it interesting at doctors' offices too. And Chelsea, I know you're a nurse, and so like I'm not trying to just rag on the medical system, but like they don't really tell you a lot. I mean, you have to ask a lot of questions to figure out what was going on. I mean, I recently went to the doctor, and because I had like not to have my yeast infection just take over this podcast, but I had like, a yeast infection, but it was, sticking around, and I just like, I felt like I didn't know what was going on down there. And I went there, and, she was a great nurse practitioner, and I actually do really like her, but she had all these tests done. And when they called me back, like they just sent me medication. And I was like, but like, what are the test results? And like, what does that tell you? And why does that tell you that? And like, what's going on? And like, how do I prevent this? And like, I didn't get any of that information. And I feel like with women's health and a lot of health, I mean, I have a friend with cancer now that's experiencing the same thing. And it's like, you're getting taken care of because they're pushing you through the steps and the appointments and everything, but like, they're not always informing you of what is going on and why, because to them, it's like, they just want to get you to the next step. But like, there's a whole world going on inside your head, and it's affecting your day. It's affecting your life. And you want to know about your body. And so there's this like power, like disconnect, because they have the info, but you own the body, you know?
There's no focus on education.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, this was one of my big questions was like, now that you know all the information you know now, if for some reason magically like you could go back, is there anything that you think you would have done like differently, or like you wish you knew when you were younger that maybe would have made this process a little bit easier? Like, is there anything people can do to kind of, you know, make this journey a little bit more doable if they find that this is something that might be happening for them? Like, I don't know. That's just my question. Now looking back after the experience, like what was it that you wish you had known?
I definitely wish I had taken more time to like get to know my body, my cycle, when I ovulate. I mean, I was put on the pill at 15 years old, not because I was sexually active, but because I had acne and I had bad cramps. And it was it wasn't even my doctor, it was the pharmacist was like, you should get on this. Like, why am I listening to a pharmacist? But I was on that until I basically got married. And so I knew I had irregular cycles the 2 years from age 13 to 15. I would skip months at a time. And I remember tracking it on a handwritten calendar. And so when I finally got off the pill, I just was like, it's been like 15 years. I don't know what my cycles look like. And by the time I was tracking ovulation, it was like we were trying to conceive. So I encourage women to like get to know their bodies, their cycles, and just like be assertive and ask questions. I have a friend who, when I was trying to conceive, she was trying to do the opposite. And so we were both tracking our ovulation for different reasons. But she's like, you've really encouraged me to like ask for hormone testing and just like, because I have irregular cycles too. And just really like push to get answers from her doctor before she was even trying to conceive. So I wish if I could go back, I wouldn't do anything different in the IUI, IVF cycles, but I wish I could tell young Julie, like, before you're sexually active, get to know your cycle and your ovulation and all that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's hard. Like sometimes it angers me. I also went on birth control around the same age, and I think I went off of it also around the same age, same situation. But it's just crazy, like how much, like the kind of a lack of control we have over that aspect, or like how much we trust doctors. But I think there's more and more information out there now about, you know, the effects. I mean, I remember like in my college class, they were talking about birth control, and they were saying like all these, it was like a sex ed college level course, and they were saying all the great things about birth control and how it's actually like the best thing to happen to women's health and stuff and all. And I was just like, cool, like I believe it, like it's great, and I'll just keep taking my pill. And then later on, I'm like, whoa, like I actually don't really know if I want this in my body anymore. So yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice for anyone listening, and or anyone that isn't quite ready to have kids yet.
Do you think, Julie, like it, I don't know, I'm just curious from your perspective, like it's with something maybe a 25 or something year old should do is like do those tests that they did in the beginning, like do whatever it was, like the fallopian tube test, you know, those few tests that they did in the beginning, like, are they expensive? Do you think it's worthwhile doing when you're young? I don't know. Do you think that's like over the top?
I think the HSG might be a little over the top. It's not very comfortable. It's pretty painful and it's, you know, a little invasive. So that's probably like once you're having issues, but I would say the blood work for sure. You can definitely, there's certain things you can request, certain levels to check. They can time it like when in your cycle to do the blood work to check. Are you in the follicular phase? Like, so I encourage you to, just like be your own advocate and ask for that blood work. Make sure your levels are looking right. And maybe they can catch something before you even need them to catch it.
That is so interesting. And do you think, and this is my own personal question, like, do you think that more women are struggling with infertility now? Or do you think that it's just more of a spoken topic?
I think it's just become less taboo to talk about. And social media has been a big reason for that. I know, I just feel like a lot of women were suffering in silence. And I said I wanted to be open with my journey because I said if I help one person, it's worth it. And I've already had several people reach out like, thank you for saying this. I'm struggling with this too. No one knows about it. I'm not comfortable sharing that. But I think social media has actually been good in that way. There's also the other side of it. There's the negative side of people, a lot of pregnancy announcement you have to see when you're, struggling. But I learned
to ask you about that. Yeah. Like how was that for you? How did you handle that?
The mute feature on Instagram became my best friend. Anyone who was pregnant or had little babies, I would just mute at that time. It was nothing personal, but I just couldn't handle it. I would stay off social media on Mother's Day and the big holidays like Halloween. I didn't want to see kids in their cute costumes. I didn't want to open the door for trick-or-treaters. I put a sign on the door, like, take the candy. So that was hard. And then my close friends who were pregnant at the time, that was hard too, because I know I probably disappointed them in some ways. Like I had a friend who was going to tell me she was pregnant, and I sensed that's what she was going to tell me in person. And I just texted her and I said, I'm so sorry, but if this is what you're going to tell me, I don't have the mental capacity to handle that right now. Because I had just found out that our egg retrieval was going to be like delayed. Or maybe it was our transfer was going to be delayed. So I had this guilt of like, I'm not being a good friend. But I also had to do what I had to do to protect my mental health. And I knew those friends would understand. If they didn't in that moment, I knew they would one day. I just had to like isolate myself a little bit and just kind of get through it.
I'm curious too. I mean, since you were so lucky and in fact, the IVF did work, has your mental health kind of just gone back to baseline? Is there some stuff that's still like lingering in there? Like, I don't know. Does it change your perception on like the actual, raising of your child, or like, will you have a second child? Does it linger? What are the like post effects, even now that, you went through it and you were successful? Is there still kind of any emotions that linger afterwards?
Definitely. I actually talked to a friend who had her son through IVF before we did our transfer. And she said, infertility doesn't go away. And even after you're successful, like she has her kids, she's like, I'm around other moms who are pregnant with their second, or talking about how many kids they want. And she's like, they get the privilege of choosing how many kids they want. And we don't have that privilege. After we had the one embryo, and I'm so lucky it worked, because I know there's many women who it doesn't work for them. So I'm so grateful. But we also potentially might have an only child, not by choice. And that's something we have to come to terms with. And so it definitely lingers. I've been asked many, many times, when you having your second? And this is from some people who knew what we went through, and some who didn't. And it's like, I'm tempted to be kind of snarky sometimes and be like, do you have another 30 grand I could borrow? But I know it's not ill intent and it's not malicious, but it's just also made me very aware of how I talk to other people. I'm never going to ask a woman again, when are you having another baby? Or are you thinking about having a second? Because you just never know what someone's going through.
It's really good to know. That's really good to know.
Asking questions in general, just about if they're going to have a kid, period, if they're going to have another, it's just like, you tell me, I'm not going to ask.
Yeah. I was at my best friend's baby shower when had been trying to conceive for like a year and a half. And it was our dream to have babies together. And at the end of the party, her uncle said like, "Oh, you better catch up to this one." And it took everything not to burst into tears. And she looked at me like, "I'm so sorry." And it's like, I don't hold it against them, but it's kind of like a lack of education, honestly.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing that blows my mind is, you're like a saint, you're a fourth grade teacher. You're totally like taking care of everybody else's kids. You did all the hard work of like going through this process, paying out of pocket. And it's just crazy to me that like this is something that can be given to some people for free at some companies. And for some women, it's like this, you know what I mean? Like for some people, it won't even be an issue. They can just do IVF again. They can maybe not an issue, but I don't really understand why especially it seems like teachers get the short end of the stick constantly. Like,
Yeah.
I wish there was more equality and equity overall, because it seems like an unnecessary burden to just give to some.
Yeah. And it carries over to maternity leave. Like I have friends with, in the tech world and, 6 months paid, and I got 0 days paid. I had to save up over a decade of my sick days to give myself a maternity leave. And I would teach with the flu because I'm like, I know I'm going to need these one day. Like that was one of the first things my older colleagues told me, like save up your days for maternity leave. So it's like, it's so backwards. Like I help raise your children and then I don't get to raise my own.
Going through this process, what other systemic issues do you think there are in either like healthcare or the workplace or anywhere regarding infertility and or even just motherhood?
I think cost is a big one. Just like I'm lucky that it was accessible to me, and there's so many women, that don't have that ability. And so there needs to be a change with like coverage and things like that. I think there just needs to be more women in charge making decisions. I think if there were, a lot of these problems would probably be solved. So honestly, yeah, that's a big one.
Well, I know we could go on and on, but I think the last big question I have is just like, there's one takeaway you want to give to, all the listeners out there. What is it that you would like them to know?
One thing is just that, like, if you're going through this, you're not alone. Don't be afraid to like reach out for help. Medication is wonderful. Therapy is wonderful. And also like vote like your rights depend on it, because they do.
That is
solid
very true and very timely advice.
Very true and very timely, for sure.
Well,
and how is that just I have to ask, but how's little baby doing now?
Kai's doing great. He just turned 1 in September, and he's just the best little guy. He's such a happy boy. He's so silly. He's definitely more introverted like his parents, but so he's more of an observer in public and can be pretty straight-faced, but at home he's just like his completely silly self, and could not love him more. And honestly, like, I wouldn't change anything, because the gratitude I have for him going through what I went through, like, motherhood is really hard, but honestly, going through what we went through was harder for me because there was no positive to it. Like, I would come home and I didn't have a cute baby to hold and love on. So yeah, he just makes everything like so worth it. I'd do it 1,000,000 times over for him.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, once again, we are so blessed that you are willing to share your story. I know it's going to help so many women out there, and men and families. And it's definitely a huge thing that you decided to not only go through the process, but then share it publicly. And I really commend you for that, because that takes a lot of cojones. And, I hope too that it's partially a healing process for you. And it's going to help me too, because I am a nurse. I do talk to women all day long. I'm sure I have said an insensitive thing here or there without knowing it. So this is helping me be a better nurse for sure.
Oh, thank you. And I had a college professor once that said, healing is telling your story. And that stuck with me to this day. And yeah, it's pretty powerful.
That's
Excellent.
great.
Well,
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And it was lovely talking to you. And we wish you a solid next year with Kai, because it's a fun year from 1 to 2. So
It's going to get crazy.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
All right.
We'll talk again, man.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future conversations. And follow us on Instagram at Raising Mama Podcast for more updates, resources, and a peek behind the scenes. See you next time.